CNN Headline News, I'm Dave Walker. Russia's president-elect, Boris Yeltsin, is on his way to the United States. He arrives in Washington today for a 4-day visit, which includes a meeting with President Bush on Thursday. One of Yeltsin's spokesmen says he will try to establish an identity as a head of a sovereign European state. The Republic of Russia has been pushing for more autonomy from Moscow, but Yeltsin is expected to reassure U.S. leaders that he will cooperate with Soviet President Gorbachev. The Bush administration has taken pains to avoid offending Gorbachev, so Yeltsin is officially listed as a guest of Congress rather than the White House. Mr. Bush says he is hearing encouraging words from Mr. Gorbachev concerning a strategic nuclear arms treaty. Yesterday, he said he has received a very positive letter from the Soviet leader narrowing the differences on the START treaty. Mr. Bush says he is eager to hold a superpower summit this summer, even before the agreement's technical language is finalized. He says there are few differences remaining, but admits they are fairly difficult points.
I'd say it's a narrowing of differences, and that's what we're in an agreement here where it's 96%, or close to it, concluded. I remember Moishev sitting in the Oval Office saying this much separates us, just this much, and so I think maybe it's a little less today.
The Bush administration is praising South Africa's latest step toward completely abolishing apartheid. Yesterday, the South African Parliament repealed the Population Registration Act. That racial classification law virtually dictated where a person could live, go to school, use the bathroom, or be buried. But U.S. officials say Washington's sanctions against South Africa won't be lifted until one final condition is met. We get more from Charles Bierbauer.
The U.S. has imposed economic sanctions against South Africa since 1986 in the hope that such pressure would force an end to apartheid.
Our law says lift the sanctions when these 5 conditions, 4 out of 5 conditions, are complied with. So
the conditions imposed by the U.S. Congress required South Africa to release all political prisoners, abolish the Registration Act, end the state of emergency, end the ban on political parties for all races, and enter into good faith negotiations. U.S. officials say the latest action means 4 conditions have been met.
What they did is get rid of one of the major apartheid laws.
So, I mean, that's a major step.
It's a major step.
It is, in fact, the last of South Africa's laws which stand in the way of lifting sanctions. What remains is subject to the tricky definition of who is a political prisoner.
The only condition remaining to be met is the release of all persons persecuted for their political beliefs or detained unduly without trial. This is a process which is still underway. The South African government has released over 1,000 prisoners so far.
No one is quite certain how many remain. The U.S. Embassy in South Africa is trying to find out and is in consultation with such groups as Nelson Mandela's African National Congress. A rival of Mandela's, Zulu chief Mangosuthu Buthelezi, will be at the White House Thursday. Buthelezi has not opposed lifting sanctions, but has worried that the U.S. might be too much influenced by Mandela. President Bush has promised to consult with Congress as well, but in the end, a senior official says it will be a matter of judgment as to whether the South African government has met all the terms. National Security Advisor Scowcroft says it's best if the South African government meets all 5 conditions. And while White House spokesman Marlin Fitzwater says there is no timetable and no hurry for ending sanctions, other officials suggest that the Bush administration is anxious to end them and get on to better relations with South Africa. Charles Bierbauer, CNN with the President, Grand Junction, Colorado.
Pentagon sources confirmed to CNN that officials in charge of the Kurdish refugee relief mission are concerned about the long-term situation in northern Iraq after all U.S. forces are withdrawn. The sources say the United States is moving ahead with the withdrawal anyway, despite that concern and Kurdish protest. Kurdish leaders want Allied protection while they negotiate with Saddam Hussein. 4 European nations have agreed to leave their troops in northern Iraq until the situation there stabilizes, and they're asking the U.S. to do the same. The United Nations was supposed to replace Allied troops with a 500-member security force, but so far it has deployed fewer than 100 guards. A U.S. representative at the United Nations says Iraq may be hiding some of its more powerful weapons, and diplomats believe Baghdad has far more weapons than what it discussed in the weeks following the Gulf War. Yesterday, the United Nations Security Council voted unanimously to extend an arms embargo against Iraq, and a UN inspection team is planning to check out a possible nuclear laboratory near Mosul. If the U.S. goes to war again, chances are female pilots may join the battle. A Senate subcommittee today will examine women's top flight performance in the Gulf War and consider allowing women to fly combat missions. The House already passed a measure removing the 43-year-old ban on female fighter pilots. The legislation would allow the Pentagon to make a final decision on future policy. Women won't be allowed at the Virginia Military Institute, at least for now. A federal judge yesterday rejected a Justice Department claim that the school's males-only policy should change. The Justice Department contends keeping women out violates the 14th Amendment and the Civil Rights Act. The judge says VMI's admissions policy is necessary to meet the government's objectives of molding citizen soldiers. The announcement brought a sigh of relief for many of the cadets on campus.
That really made my summer. I was worried that there was a lot of sentiment against it, but we managed to pull it out somehow, and I just think that's great. I mean, I love this place. As much as we complain about it, it becomes a part of you, and we'd all hate to see any of the traditions change in any way.
It's not clear if the Justice Department will appeal the decision. Reports from Lebanon say at least 2 Arabs were killed in a clash with an Israeli army patrol in southern Lebanon today. Unidentified sources told the Associated Press that the fight occurred in Israel's self-declared security zone in Lebanon. They said another guerrilla was captured during the clash, while a 4th escaped. One source told AP the guerrillas were apparently on their way to attack a target in Israel. Scientists say the worst is over at the Mount Pinatubo volcano in the Philippines, but U.S. warships and cargo planes are evacuating thousands of U.S. dependents from 2 nearby military bases made largely unusable by tons of volcanic debris. About 20,000 dependents will leave in the next few days. 180,000 Filipinos have fled to refugee centers after volcanic ash crushed their homes. Red Cross officials say they expect more refugees as heavy rain causes volcano-related landslides. At least 146 deaths are blamed on Pinatubo's eruptions. Experts are warning residents near Japan's Mount Unzen volcano to be cautious as that volcano's lava dome continues to expand. Witnesses say the dome is now well over 200 feet high and appears ready to boil over. The volcano has been spewing ash, lava, and hot gas for weeks now. Today, officials evacuated a senior citizen's home, which could be in danger if there's another eruption. 39 people were killed after Mount Unzen exploded just over 2 weeks ago. The spread of AIDS and vaccines to fight the disease are key topics at the 7th International AIDS Conference in Florence, Italy. A French scientist told delegates yesterday that an experimental vaccine to stop the destruction of patients' immune systems appears promising. And one forecaster said the epidemic is likely to peak in the United States and Western Europe in the mid-1990s, but increase in Africa and Asia. Actress and AIDS activist Elizabeth Taylor also spoke yesterday. She noted that since the AIDS virus was isolated a decade ago, it has touched every corner of the globe.
10 years later, HIV has cast a long, dark shadow over every country in the world. It is a shadow that obscures the back streets of our inner cities. It is a shadow that darkens the villages of Central Africa. It is a shadow that the penetrating light of modern science and education can and must illuminate.
The AIDS epidemic has not excluded teenagers from its scope. The Los Angeles public schools now want to fight the disease by giving condoms to high school students. We get more from Ann McDermott.
Remember the teenage years? They weren't all fun and games. And these days, there's more to worry about than exams and acne. There's AIDS. And suddenly, a lot of kids aren't quite so sure they're immortal anymore.
It's scary. It's really scary.
In Los Angeles, a task force on AIDS appointed by the school board has completed a new report on how schools can educate students about the disease.
In fact, the fastest growing age group for cases of full-blown AIDS is people in their early 20s, and that means the fastest growing age group for infection with the virus is people between the ages of 13 and 19.
But some of the recommendations in that report have already enraged some parents, like the recommendation that sexually active children protect themselves by using condoms that would be distributed at high schools, even junior high schools.
What this group of left-wing lefties in the building behind us want to do is to take our children from us.
But a lot of students, whether they're sexually active or not, say they like the idea of a condom distribution.
For school to hand them out, I think it's a great idea. Not for me, but for my friends, because I really care about them.
They think they're too young to get the AIDS, but I think everybody can get it, you know.
But even teenagers aren't in total agreement.
Giving out condoms to teenagers is just like telling them go and have sex.
A doctor who's become an authority on AIDS says they will anyway.
Teenagers will have sex. Parents may tell them not to, but teenagers will have sex. Our responsibility as a society is to help them protect themselves when and if they do have sex.
The Los Angeles School Board won't be making any immediate decision on what to do about the AIDS report's recommendations, and many details still would have to be worked out. But in New York City, a decision has been made, and condoms will be distributed at some high schools there starting in September.
New York City has only 3% of the country's adolescent population, that is the 13 to 20-year-olds. But we have 20% of the 13 to 20-year-olds in this country who have AIDS.
Officials in New York admit the move has met with some controversy, but they expect it will save lives, which is what the Task Force on AIDS in Los Angeles hopes will happen here. Ann McDermott, CNN, Los Angeles.
A House panel has subpoenaed details of a pact between the U.S. Agriculture Department and Bristol-Myers. The controversy is over the California yew tree, which yields a cancer-fighting substance. The chemical company is reportedly negotiating for near-exclusive access to the tree in federal forest. In exchange, the company would help finance protection of the yew. The House panel wants to ensure smaller companies also have access to the tree. An explosion and fire at a South Carolina chemical plant has left 6 people dead, 33 others injured. The incident happened yesterday as workers began mixing chemicals for a flame retardant. The blast at the Albright and Wilson Americas plant rocked parts of Charleston. The cause of the explosion is still under investigation. In Miami, police are looking for 2 men who drove by and allegedly fired shots at a construction site near where former President Jimmy Carter and his wife were working. 1 man was slightly injured in yesterday's incident. The Carters are among hundreds of volunteers with Habitat for Humanity, which have begun building houses and a daycare center for low-income families. Dollars and Cents News is up next.
This is CNN Headline News.
U.S. Treasury Secretary Nicholas Brady says taxpayers won't be saddled with a bailout of the banking industry, providing 2 conditions are met. First, he says, Congress needs to pass the comprehensive reform program sponsored by President Bush. Brady says the plan, combined with continued economic growth, will keep banks from meeting the same fate as the savings and loan industry. A congressional committee is expected to start discussing bank reforms later this morning. The Soviet Union won't be getting as many U.S. films for a while. The major U.S. studios say Moscow isn't doing enough to stop film piracy, so they're putting an embargo on all movie exports to that country. The chairman of the Motion Picture Association of America says the ban will be lifted when Moscow adopts legislation to stop the piracy. It appears the Soviet Union is about to get most favored nation trade status from the U.S. Herb Chapman reports the benefits of the new status will be mostly political and not economic.
The tariff reduction could have been given 20 years ago, but Congress insisted that most favored nation treatment wait for the Soviets to allow free emigration. Now that that political demand is being met, the initial impact of the trade benefit is to show political support for Mikhail Gorbachev.
The actual economic benefit, in fact, will not be that large, perhaps numbering in the tens or maybe hundreds of millions of dollars. And if you think of that relative to the great need and requirement of the Soviet economy to reform, that's really minuscule.
The major Soviet exports have been oil, minerals, raw materials, furs, but not fur coats.
Their engineering is very good. There are sectors in which they will be converting military production to consumer production, and most likely will come up with some very good products that will have an international market.
But proponents of more trade and investment are hard put to identify specifically what the Soviets will be able to make that would sell abroad. While a major difference in today's Soviet Union is the welcome mat for Western entrepreneurs, political risk will continue to influence investment.
I'll have to say that that depends on the continuing reforms in the Soviet Union. If the Soviet Union disintegrates and somebody hardline comes in and it closes up again, which I think is very unlikely, then trade might come to a standstill, not for economic reasons, but for political reasons.
It costs next to nothing to grant the Soviet Union most favored nation status. What would cost is the substantial outside aid Moscow wants to rebuild its infrastructure. So economists expect that it could take years for the Soviets to come up to the level of manufactured exports to the West that some third world most favored nations have already achieved. Irv Chapman, CNN Business News, Washington.
Pepsi-Cola is taking advantage of Poland's move to a free market economy. The company will invest $60 million there over the next 5 years. Pepsi already operates 8 plants in Poland and plans to open a 9th. A spokesman says the expansion should create 3,000 new jobs. Pepsi is reportedly Poland's most popular soft drink with 30% of the market. A federal official is warning the poultry industry to clean up its act. The head of the Food Safety and Inspection Service says public concern about the industry is growing, and he says poultry producers need to take additional steps to ensure the safety of their product. Calls to the inspection service about the poultry industry have reportedly increased by 50% this year. Wall Street took a slight drop after strong gains at the end of last week. The Dow Jones Industrials average will open this morning down more than 6 points at 29.93. In Tokyo, the Nikkei average lost more than 257 points today to finish at 24,685. Baseball highlights up next in CNN Headline Sports.
This is CNN Headline News.
I'm Paul Reynolds. CNN Headline Sports. You knew it couldn't go on forever. The Twins' 15-game winning streak is over. Baltimore rallied for 3 in the 9th to beat them 6-5. Randy Milligan delivered the crushing blow, a 2-run, 2-out double to the gap in left center. Cal Ripken Jr. came home with the winning and streak-busting run. But Minnesota will stay in first in the AL West because the Brewers shut out the A's 5-0. Don August tossing a 5-hit complete game for his 5th straight win. At Fenway, the Angels snapped a 4-game losing skid with a 4-2 win over Boston. California got all their runs in the 5th. Wally Joyner contributing this 2-run double. Mark Langston got the win. He's 8-2. In the only other game, the Rangers rallied to beat the Royals in 10 innings. National League, the Mets beat up on Cincinnati 10-6. Hubie Brooks and Howard Johnson each with 2-run shots. Before the game, the Reds put Eric Davis on the 15-day DL. At the Vet, Philadelphia edged Atlanta 4-3. That's former Brave Dale Murphy doing the damage to his ex-teammates, a solo shot that broke a 3-3 tie and made Philly fans happy. Atlanta with a chance to tie it in the bottom of the inning, but check out the throw from Sil Campusano. He nails Tommy Gregg at the plate. Steve Lake taking the brunt of the punishment in that one. The Expos won it on Tim Wallach's single in the 16th. The Pirates held off the Padres. St. Louis got by San Francisco, and the Dodgers beat the Cubs. Payne Stewart rallied from 2 shots down with 3 holes to go to win the U.S. Open over Scott Simpson in an 18-hole playoff. Stewart used a birdie on 16 to make up 2 strokes and then parred out while Simpson once again fell apart, bogeying the last 3 holes. Neither player shot well. Stewart at 3 over, Simpson at 5 over. Paul Reynolds, CNN Headline Sports.
This is CNN Headline News.
A royal pain in the back. That's what's bothering the Prince of Wales. Back pain has prompted Prince Charles to cancel most of his public appearances for the rest of the month. The spokesman says the prince will, however, attend a parade Friday honoring Britain's Persian Gulf forces. Actress Julia Roberts is getting a lot of attention lately, but most of it is not about her new film, Dying Young. The main topic seems to be her postponed wedding to actor Kiefer Sutherland. Sandy Kenyon talked with Roberts just days before that postponement was announced.
The wedding of Julia Roberts and Kiefer Sutherland promised to be one of the highlights of the social season in Hollywood, but it didn't happen. Yet, in an interview just days before the nuptials were postponed, Roberts appeared to be a young woman very much in love.
It's everything that is wonderful in the world heightened.
This latest news comes at a time when the tension has never been greater for the star, who's made a number of films back-to-back and recently was hospitalized with the flu. She's become America's favorite pretty woman after just a little more than half a dozen films. Roberts is perhaps the only female star whose name above the title virtually guarantees a film will do good business.
I do the best I can do in a situation. I sort of go about things in an unconscious manner more than anything else, and I'm left to see what happens along with everybody else.
In her latest part, Roberts helps a rich young man face dying young and falls in love in the process.
You want me to tell you I love you? You can say, well, great, well, now I'm going to die and I'm going to leave.
What was your first reaction to the material when you saw it?
Well, quite frankly, when I first read it, I had been prepared for the fact that it was, you know, quite sad. So I went into it a bit, you know, oh, how sad can it be, sort of, you know. And I was reading it and getting along quite fine, and suddenly found myself just in a dither of tears where it was quite early in the morning, and it was, it's a hard piece to deal with.
Your character says, I feel everything at one point in this movie. Do you think you're a sensitive person?
I do, yeah.
Do you almost have to be to do your line of work?
I think so. I mean, I think you have to be open to the possibilities of a variety of motions, which you don't always sort of want to tackle. You know, some days you just don't want to put yourself in that place.
In a recent poll, Roberts was voted not only the sexiest actress in America, but also the best. Just 23 years old and making $7 million for her next movie, Roberts has decided to take most of the next year off as a way of coping with the burdens of stardom, not the least of which is the harsh stare of the public eye. Sandy Kenyon, CNN Entertainment News, Hollywood.
And finally, the thrill of exhibition and the agony of sore feet. That's what athletes at this week's Nude Olympics outside Baltimore will most likely feel. Competitors will be getting down to the bare essentials in their ultimate quest for the gold. Events include track, swimming, tennis, and volleyball. And the non-athletic can win medals in fishing, body painting, backgammon, and trivia. We'll see you there. Coming up on Headline News, the debate on women flying in combat for the U.S. military. And President Bush gets good news from his Soviet counterpart on arms agreements. Stay tuned for those and other top stories. I'm Dave Walker. Around the world in 30 minutes, this is CNN Headline News.